Okay, man, let's get crazy. Wow. So, this video is about my guitar effects board project. Any guitarist that's used effects pedals knows what a hassle it can be managing power supplies and batteries, along with all of the patch cords that connect things. While this may be more of an issue for professional musicians, even when jamming with friends, it's nice to be able to plop down your effects board and start playing with all of your toys at your feet. With the hundreds of effects pedal choices, along with the various effects board choices, it's safe to say that every effects board is a personalized artistic statement. There are going to be features that you care about and ones that you don't, and ultimately, how well you address those issues will determine how satisfied you are with the final result. I wanted a wooden footboard for ease of fabrication and modification. I also wanted a built-in power supply, ideally with a battery for easy setup. I wanted a hard case so I could carry it around in confidence, but I didn't need it to be built to professional road case standards. I wanted the board to have jacks for my output channels instead of trying to connect directly to the pedals. And of course, I wanted it to be big enough for a reasonable number of pedals without being so big as to not be lightweight anymore.
Okay, so first thing I did was model the board in OpenSCAD and make sure that I was happy with the basic design. So these yellow side pieces here in the back, these are 3.5 inch wide, 1/2 inch thick, 14 inches this way, and I went with 23.5 for the width across here, just a little bit under 2 feet. That way it would fit in a 2-foot space if it needs to fit in a 2-foot space. And it also gives me a little bit of room to trim up the ends of the board. So all of these boards came in 2-foot lengths pre-cut at Home Depot, and 1/2 inch poplar, which is a fairly hardwood, a little harder than pine. Nice to work with. So, being 1/2 inch thick is lighter weight than a 3/4. It's perfect size for a little pedal board like this. Make it strong and durable. And with these runners mortised into the side pieces, that makes it really strong. So I routed this out and glued those in. And so we've got the alternating 1.5 and 2.5 inch wide slats provided deck, and about 3/4 of an inch gap there between them to get our patch cords through. And it's not, a lot of details aren't shown here. I didn't show the box joints on the corners or the pockets for the butterfly hardware and whatnot, but this let me envision the basic unit. And I decided to use this space here underneath to put my power supply and mount some jacks on this back panel for my my outputs with my left, right, wet and dry channel. So to make sure this was everything I wanted it to be, I worked up some basic models of my effects pedals so I could spread them around there and just make sure that these dimensions would work well enough for that. So got the little wah and a bunch of pedals here. So once I was happy with this layout here, it was time to go out to the wood shop and start cutting some wood.
Well, I thought I'd made video of this, but I somehow lost the file so now I'm making this after everything is already done. So this is a couple pieces of scrap basically I had left over, a piece of the poplar, So this is the what we call it, I know, 1/2 x 4. You can see the label there, 3.5, 1.5. And this was a 48-inch piece here, and then we had the 1.5 inch wide, and I had some other pieces that were also 2.5 inches wide. So it's a nice, pretty good looking wood. Okay, this is my simplified box joint jig. There's a lot of instructional videos on YouTube about how to make one of these, and all the ones I've seen do the board in a vertical position so that the router can be held in a normal upright position. But I decided to use the router sideways, and I had this piece of scrap already laying around with all these holes in it, and not particularly right now, but these can be useful. I found out for letting you clamp it back here. You can get a clamp through one of these holes and clamp things as needed. And boy, I've started using these. There's welding clamps, but they've got a really deep jaw and big foot on them here to help keep from denting the wood. So a little bit heavy, but I really like working with these, as well as the usual accompaniment of standard wood clamps. But so the board to be box jointed go in here like this, and so either start the first one basically in this position, or start it here. And so see, I don't have the right router bit in here, but basically I placed you see I've got a larger hole at the top here, and so this gives me room to put the router in between these rails, which are carefully set up to match the width of my router base here at the start. And so first thing I did was just route a big channel here in my chosen board, and then drill a big hole at the top to help me get in and out without making a mess. And so then basically I'd set the depth on my router so that it protrudes through here to the desired depth, and in this case it'd be a 1/2 inch because I'm using 1/2 inch boards. And so once I've got that depth right, then I just have to put the router in and make a pass down, and then I've left taken a notch out here, and then we just pick the board up and slide it over. So here's a board I was playing with and testing things with. So as you can see here, I start the board here, do that first one, then I just move it over to the next one, move it over, and get the next one. So two things are key here: the width of this and the width of this gap right here. So since my router joint here is, the box joint is the same width 1/2 inches as the thickness of my board, I just cut a scrap of board and held it flush on this edge, and then position this block up against this 1/2 inch spacer. And I tried nailing these. If you have a pneumatic nailer, you can probably do that, but my experience was trying to hand nail things, it always moved around and wasn't accurate enough. So in the end I ended up gluing this in place, and it was actually just a little bit too far that way, So I had to add just a couple layers of tape to this side to move things over and to get the joints fitting exactly the way I wanted them to. So once I got, and so on the other end, you know, you basically start it like this, and then your first move is over to here, and then you're done here with this. So that's this really simple jig for making the box joints. I got this one little piece of scrap here, another piece of scrap, 2 pieces of whatever for some rails here, and some sort of base to mount it to. So you can easily make this in I don't know, 5-10 minutes from stuff you probably got laying around in your shop. So that's how I made the box joints for the corners on the FX board. Alright, so here's the first stage of the pedal board here. I got everything glued together and gave it a primer coat of some black paint here. You notice I got the top, the rabbited this out. I'm meant to have the rabbit on the inside back here, but it's on the outside edge because I glued the board on wrong. So I'll make that work fine with the I'll just reverse the rabbit on the top, the backboard that matches up with that. So the whole purpose of that rabbit is just to help lock in the top and keep everything from shifting around. So I placed an order with Pen Elko and got some hardware here. I got a cool little mini butterfly draw latch there. So got 2 of these, and got a couple little breakaway hinges too. So these just kind of fall apart and kind of just hook back together. So these are going to go on the back side to connect the top, and then I'm going to place butterfly latches on the sides. And you notice this has a really thin profile, so even with this half-inch board, I don't have to route out, you know, all the way through there. So just make a shallow little more than a 1/4 inch pocket there for these latches. So that'll go in on the sides, and I'll wait till I have the top built and just clamp everything together and do that route in one pass on both sides. Make sure that all lines up. So that's, and I've got to be one large board that you know, spans this whole space on the front, and this will also be where the carrying handle is. Now, just released it back in July, I think it was. This is the new Joyo something 5. Get the model number anyway. Model JP05. So a little bit kludgy here because we got the off and on switch on one side and DC input and all of our outputs on the other side. The really cool thing about this is you don't have to have it plugged in. it's got its own built-in lithium-ion battery. It should be good for several hours of operation with most pedals. You can see we've got a bunch of 500 amp outputs here, as well as 400 milliamp outputs. So that should power things really nicely. And I've hooked this up, and it's sounds perfectly quiet, and all my pedals sound great. So I'm really happy with this. It's pretty good price. So I'm gonna route out a hole, drill a hole here so that I can access this switch, mount the supply like this, and then I'll probably just go ahead and run a wire from here and mount a jack on the back as well, so I don't have to get underneath here for charging. And I'm just going to 3D print a U bracket to go over this so that I can screw that in, just have that clamped and held in place by my little custom 3D printed bracket. So
Those of you who wonder what you do with the 3D printer, this is a good example. Whenever I need some little bracket or whatever, I'll bottle it up in OpenSCAD and print it out, and there I go. And so over here's all the code. You can see not a whole lot. So here I've got the dimensions of the power supply, X and Y, its height. The Z, that's the thickness of my plastic here. So see the OpenSCAD, it's basically you're translating and rotating cubes or cylinders here. In this case, I create a big cube and then start lopping off pieces of it by taking what's called the difference function. Anyway, this is what we end up with from all that. And you'll notice I printed it. It's drawn sideways here. This is the up direction. So this way it's real easy. I can print it this way. We start at the bottom here, and the printer works up top. There's no big gaps to span or anything like that. I've just got these little tiny screw holes, and it's no problem for the printer to make these little holes and you know, print the plastic over nothing in this little area of the hole there. That's not a problem for it. But the big gaps are be a bit of a problem. You have to print support material. So anyway, you know, I was able to do this in just a few minutes and print it out in about a half an hour. And so, you know, when installed more like this with the power supply here. And of course, actually, this is attached to the underside of the foot pedals. And so it's just basically just, I made this just a little bit less than the height of the power supply, just to ensure that this would really, you know, hold it tight. And there's no chance of it rattling around. This is going to hold it tight, so it can't slip out. And then finally, I'm also going to add a couple barrel jacks to here, and when my pedal input, I'll have an input jack and two output jacks. So I'm going to be creating a stereo board, so be super functional. And this whole thing right now just literally weighs a couple pounds. I don't even think it weighs maybe 3 pounds at the most. So in the end, it's going to be fairly lightweight, you know, with this half inch wood I'm using. So that's the pedal board. This shot gives you a look at the inside of the top for the pedal board. Notice the piece of Velcro in the corner that holds the power supply. T-nuts back up the carrying handle. I used a trim bit in my router to take a piece of 1x8 pine down just a little bit to the right width to match up with the bottom when the top is closed. You can notice the glue on each joint. I was a little sloppy with that. I was originally planning on painting it all black, but it looked just a little too nice to do that, even though it's not quite cabinet grade work. Here's a good close-up of
half of a breakaway hinge which connects to the back half of the effects board, and you can see the rabbited groove on the edge to interlock with the bottom half of the case. The panel piece is 1/4 inch mahogany plywood. Once the box joints were glued together, I ran a rabbet bit along the top edge so that the panel could be recessed in. The pilot bearing naturally created radius curves in the corners, so rather than chisel them out square, I just sanded the corners of the panel until they fit perfectly. I also rough cut the panel and then clamped a guide to it so I could run a trim bit along the edge for a perfect fit on the width. The top was clamped and glued while mated to the bottom to guarantee that even if they were out of square, they would still match up. And it came out within a 1/16 of an inch of perfectly in square. The last panel I made was for the bottom. I couldn't come up with a good latching system for it, so it's just held in place by 10 screws. 4 feet attached to the bottom panel help the whole thing sit nicely on most surfaces, and I got inspired and added a little stencil logo for a finishing touch. The top and bottom fit together nicely and look like some sort of strange retro suitcase or something. The back side has little rubber feet so it can be stood like a briefcase, and the barrel jacks for output are recessed for protection, as well as the power supply switch access and charging port. You can see how the power supply can be stowed in the top. So, to turn the board on, I just reach back here and right here you see switch there. That's the switch for turning it on and off. And here's a charging port. So turn it on. See, got some blinking lights here now, and you can see the back of the connector right there. So, and here's a charging cable if I want to run it off of the charger instead of the batteries. Just plug it in there. Okay, now let's look at the outputs here. So you can see the barrel jacks down inside there here. So the first one is my center, and this one is stage left, stage right. So over here we have the input. So I can plug 2 guitars in here. Here's my trusty guitar. So we can switch between guitar 1 or guitar 2 without having to yank plugs around. It's just kind of nice. So from here we go to the tuner, and the tuner currently goes out to the wah, which goes into this whatever you call this, overdrive pedal of my own design. And so it currently goes from here to the compressor. I gotta say, I'm not particularly happy with the compressor operation. It's just not really the sound I'm going for these days. So I'm probably gonna swap this out and possibly put a boost before the distortion here. Anyway, so the output of here, this is basically the end of our dry chain, and so that then goes to this splitter box, where if the blue light's on, that means we're using both wet and dry, or well, if it's off, then so we can switch between the left and right, or just the center channel. So that's kind of that can be a kind of a cool way to come into a solo, so it can be like chilling along here using a bunch of effects on your rhythm part, and then hit this, and now you're using the center channel as well, and so that pops your sound out for that lead, and then you can go right back. So this blue light was a little bit too bright, so I put this capped on tape, which is yellow, over it, which is really good at filtering blue light, so you may know. So anyway, that kind of dims it down so it's not so blinding. So anyway, this is still just a mono signal here. Comes out this left right, and it goes over to this Boss RV6 reverb unit, which I really like. And so this here we take input A, but we get stereo out with A and B. So the A channel, basically that gets routed straight to the back there, and becomes left or right depending on how you all look on that. Anyway, so the B output then goes to this tailspin vibrato unit, which really works out fabulously in this setup. Putting a little bit of vibrato on one side, it makes an awesome chorus effect, and it just really adds an amazing depth to the sound, and can be, normally something like this, there's a very narrow range where you can use it where it's not too annoying in terms of the rate and the depth and all that. But when you're only putting it on one of 3 channels, suddenly it becomes very different, and you can really crank up the depth and play around with different rates, and get more of a Leslie effect, or just this slow ethereal vibration to the sound that just adds a whole nother dimension. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. So we come out of the tailspin, and I've got this cheap little looper, and so we go through the looper, and then I made another little pedal here. This it's just a passive attenuator pedal. So we've got a foot switch, so we can either be in bypass mode where it's doing nothing, or I can press the switch and suddenly now I'm either at unity gain, no effect, or I can dial it back, so can effectively, in this position, it's effectively a mute on my loop, and I can just kill it that way instead of having to worry about 2 stomps or whatever. That gets really confusing. This is reliable. I can press this and I can sort out the blinking lights with everything else later. So anyway, that's basically the end of the signal here, and as this label shows, so here's my second wet channel out, and so that completes the signal chain. Of course, if you ever had a pedal board like this, it's all kind of in flux, and that's part of the fun of it all. I've had this Morley for decades, as well as this compressor, and recently been building some of these others. So I actually have 4 separate pedals here that I built. Right now, the ABYs that I'm using, it's just a passive wired thing, but I am working on a design with isolation transformers and an op amp. Just for some reason, I'm not getting signal through the transformer the way I thought. The op amp's working anyway. Something I'm still working on. So, of course, that would provide ground isolation and buffering of the signal, which is useful for some applications. So it's all built out of wood. I got a little unpainted strip that I put in at the end to just help reinforce this kind of thin plywood that's the bottom. I glued that on, See the screws that are holding my feet on the bottom. So, and we've got these breakaway hinges in the back, and these really nice thin profile butterfly latches. This is only a 1/2 inch thick here, and I didn't even have to route the whole depth of it out to put, create the pocket here for this half of this butterfly latch. So came out really nice. And so these are just 1.5 inch and 2.5 inch wide alternating strips of poplar. The whole thing is made out of poplar, 1/2 inch thick, readily available. Home Depot, places like that. Usually it's about the only 1/2 inch wood you can get that going to a specialty place. So it's nice and lightweight and strong. And you can kind of see on the ends here how didn't clean that up too much. I kind of hacked it when I did it too, but I basically mortised out those joints for these side pieces, so those aren't going anywhere, and the whole thing's glued together. And we've got these edges are rabbeted here so that the top is held in place when we fit the top on it. So another thing I did to complete my setup was get this nice little this is 6+2 total of 8 channel snake, and we've got three wires coming out there, and if I plop this down up at the front of a stage, you'd either have to run 3 sets of cables all back to my amps, or get a snake. So it may seem kind of like overkill, but now imagine that I've got a vocal mic stand, and maybe I've got a powered monitor. I can send my monitor feed on this A or B channel here. And so I've got 1, 2, 3. Here's my wet, or my dry, and my left and right wet signals. And now I can say I put a monitor on A, and have a mic stand on 4 for vocals. Maybe I've got another mic that I use for an acoustic guitar. Already I've only got two channels left on this snake that seemed like it was overkill for the job. But now I've always got a nice tidy stage. I've only got this one 30-foot cable to roll up when the gig's done, and it sends the signal back to my amps. So that's how to pull off the wet-dry setup with the minimum of hassle, and make your sound guy happy at the same time, because that'll make his job a lot easier too. And and another thing is, maybe one of these other channels here, you could share that for somebody else's mic stand, and that way you're helping keep the stage clean as well. So I think this is a great little thing to have in the toolkit. Of course, to finish the connections to and from the snake, need some extra cables. So I've got some of these. Got a few these cables. Got the female XLR end, so that plugs in here to the house side of the snake, and then of course this then it goes to my amplifier, and then on the stage plug this in the box, and then this the other end will get routed to the back of the effects pedal. So we're just dropping this a foot or two away from the effects pedals. So now it's probably time to hear what it sounds like.